Hello everyone, in this video you are going to study about different kinds of statistical tests used in analyzing the data or answering your research questions or testing your hypothesis. Before you learn more about what is descriptive statistic, what is inferential statistic, we need to identify or able to differentiate the types of data. In general, data can be categorized into four, but commonly it is known as two big categories. First is continuous, and then second is categorical. Nominal is a kind of categorical data. It is qualitative variable, so the number might be used, but it shows or represents category. For example, in gender, one is coded as a male and then 2 is coded as female. Then the number 1 and 2 actually cannot be counted because it just represents the category. It cannot be counted as 1 plus 2 and become 3 or 2 divided by 1, for example, or then we look for the mean of that. The second types of the data is ordinal. Ordinal is quite similar to nominal, but it has the rank. For example, in survey, might be 0 is coded for less than elementary school, 2 for junior high school, or 3 for university. So there's a rank in that category, but it's still a kind of categorical data. The third types of data or measurement level is interval. This one is usually used when somebody wants to measure about students' attitude or motivation using, let's say, a Likert scale. And then the scale, the distance between the scale, for example, 1 to strongly disagree to 6 for strongly agree. The scale between 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 is actually has similar distance, but it is not as a true number as in ratio. Ratio is a number that shows the data from, let's say, 0 to the maximum 1. For example, the grade of the student from 1 to 10 or 50 to 100, or let's say 1 to 4. Again, it has 0. That's why it has a meaningful fraction or ratio. The other example is might be weight, or let's say salary as well. Please remember that interval or ratio is grouped as a kind of continuous variable, while nominal or ordinal is grouped as a categorical variable or categorical data. Categorical or continuous will lead to the different methods of analysis. Now, this one is the one that I have mentioned before. Remember, ratio, it has absolute 0, while interval, the distance between the scale is meaningful, and then the ordinal, it attributes can be order or rank, and then nominal is only a name, it's not the number as it is. Why we need to know the measurement level or the types of the data is because it helps us to interpret the data from a variable, and then it helps us also to select the most appropriate statistical analysis that must be used or that should be used to analyze the data. So basically we need to be aware about, let's say, if you want to see the inferential analysis, that is we try to infer from based on the data, then we need to identify the types of the data either as a dependent variable and then dependent variable. So we need to be aware with dependent variable and independent variable, and independent variable, and then the types of both variable. Either dependent variable is a kind of categorical or continuous, and if, let's say, independent variable is categorical or continuous. Now let's come to the descriptive statistic. As its name, this descriptive statistic, or this method of analysis, is actually summarize the information and give the general understanding to help the audience understand the data. It includes the central tendency and then dispersion. Central tendency consists of mean, median, and mode, and then dispersion consists of standard, deviation, and variance. I will not teach you how to count it manually, and all of these can be run in statistical package, for example, SPSS, SAS, or HLM or M+, any kind of statistical software automatically, even in Excel. But you need to understand the concept behind it. For example, mean, that means the average. It doesn't make sense if we count, let's say, 1 for male and then 2 for female. We count 1 and 2 to seek for the average, because it doesn't has meaning. It doesn't have meaning of that. While median is actually the score in the middle of the data, and then the mode, the highest, the frequency of that. While for the standard deviation is actually the range from the real score from the average or the mean, and then the variance is the square root of the standard deviation. All of this descriptive statistics must be understood well in order to able to understand or describe or interpret the data appropriately. So please remember, if the data is nominal, then the analysis in descriptive statistic that is very, let's say, suitable is only for the mode. But if it is in the type of ordinal, then it can be counted use, let's say, mode or median. If it is interval or ratio, then it can be mode, median, and mean. So here, if we count mean, or let's say the average of the score of the students, it makes sense because it has, let's say, 0 or 0 to, let's say, 10 or 0 to 100. It's a continuous variable. But let's say if we count gender, for example, male and female, then we can just count the mode because we need to know the number, but we cannot count the average because it doesn't make sense. This is the example how to do it manually. For example, this is the variable of the score of the students. Then we can count the mean of that, the total of this. We add the number, and then we add the total of the score, and then the number of the, let's say, the frequency, and then we divide it and we get the mean. Or let's say we get the median, then we get this one as the mean, and then if we count for the whole of that, we get the 7 for that to count the score here that happened. Now let's come to the inferential statistic. This statistic is very meaningful if it is run, or if it is used in the the right process in the right method. Inferential statistic usually is the outcomes of the statistic help the researcher to make deduction or inferences from the collected data and to test the hypothesis and to find the relation of, let's say, from to the sample of the population. So in inferential statistic, there are two types of the method. First, or estimation. First is hypothesis testing to test the hypothesis, and the second is statistical tests, the test to that count the data statistically. So this is a very specific one. Once we have, let's say, reset question, if we would like to know the differences, for example, if we want to conduct an experiment and we have one group for treatment and one group for control, then we want to compare the result between two samples. Let's say we want to test if certain kinds of teaching will lead students, will help students to be more motivated. And then if you want to test the difference between the group, then we might identify that, let's say, students' grade is the continuous variable, but the types of the teaching might be categorized as categorical variable. So let's say if we want to see differences, not the association, then we might come to identifying of the type of the data. If it is nominal with two samples, then we might use independent, or if it is independent or paired with the two samples, then it might come to chi-square or McNemar. But let's say if it is ordinal and then it has two samples, let's say one is independent, both of them are independent, then it might use man with name. But if it is pair, let's say same sample, then it that just use Wilcoxon. Now let's say the example that I mentioned before, let's say teaching method is the independent variable, and then students grade or student motivation is a dependent variable. Then dependent variable here, which is student motivation, can be categorized as a continuous variable, while teaching method might be categorized as categorical variable or nominal. So let's see if it is, because it's experiment, we have two different samples, then we need to see which one is the most appropriate one. If it is, let's say, because the continuous variable is actually ratio, the grade of the, let's say, students, or let's say students motivation in Likert scale, that the data might be interval or ratio. Then if it is two samples, only two samples, or let's say one is the control group and the other one is treatment group, then we might come to either independent or pair. If the sample is the only one, the sample is only one, the same, but different methods is used, then we come to the pair, and then we use the pair t-test. But if let's say both groups are independent, they are different, then we come to independent t-test. So let's say in the experiment, if we have two different groups, then we use independent t-test. But if we only have one group and we give two different treatments here, and then we might use pair t-test. Let's say if the sample is not only one group or not only two groups but more than that, let's say class A, B, C, and there are 4 classes there that we include as a samples, then we might come to, let's say, if they are independent, then we use ANOVA, or if they related, then we use ANOVA as well, actually. So here, if it is only 2 sample, we use t-test, either independent or pair, but if it is more than 2 samples, we can use ANOVA. So this or the name here actually presents the formula that the maths formula that can be counted manually, but in statistical software we can just click the icon shows that, and then it will be counted automatically. But we need to understand the types of data in order to help us interpret the result of the analysis. If, let's say, we want to see not differences but the association, for example, if student motivation relate to student's grade, then we might come to association. Then if it is nominal, then we use chi-square. If the data, let's say the data is ordinal, the dependent variable is ordinal, then it's might be use Spearman. Or if it is interval or ratio, let's say in our case I mentioned about students grade, then it is interval or ratio, then person is the most appropriate method of analysis that can be used instead of using Spearman or chi-square. Alright, these are statistical tests that usually used in educational field. Please pay attention to the top of the table, the head. Here is the statistical test, kinds of statistical tests, and the second column is the type of hypothesis or questions. This usually is a kind of the hypothesis or research question that you use in your study or in your own research. And then identification of the variable, you have to count the number of independent variables in your study as well as dependent variables. And then which one is categorical and which one is continuous variable, and if it is in normal distribution. Those are criteria to help you to see which statistical test that is appropriate for your own study. Let's say if we conduct an experiment research or experimental study, then the research question might be, is there any differences between control group and uncontrolled group, or between group with, let's say, if we use teaching methods that let's say pictures, then we might say that is there any differences between group who get students in group who get teaching by using pictures and students in an uncontrolled group that didn't get instruction by using pictures. So here there are 2 groups, and there are 2 different groups, not only one but 2, and then one get the control as a control group, which means the group doesn't get teaching instruction in using pictures, and the other one get instruction by using the pictures in teaching, get using pictures. And then we might see that which one is independent and which one is dependent.
if we want to see, let's say, is there any differences, then we might want to look for the students' grade to compare between those group, and this is a kind of group comparison. So and then we will come to the statistical test that seek to compare the variable, and then we cannot choose relation, or let's say regression, or let's say association or relationship, or cause effect of that one. Let's say for experiment, then we might see if it is independent variable is a kind of categorical, and if dependent variable is continuous. If let's say the student's grade is a kind of continuous, and then let's say teaching method is a kind of categorical, and we just have, let's say, one independent variable and one dependent variable, and then we might use t-test. But if we have two or one or more than one for independent variables, and we just only have one for variables, and then the type is actually categorical for independent, and then continuous for independent, then we might choose ANOVA or analysis of variance instead of choosing t-test. The same things happen if we would like to see, let's say, correlation or regression, let's say several factors that might influence students' grade. Let's say the time spent to study might correlate or might influence, let's say, in students' grade or students' motive, students' capability or academic achievement. Then we might have, let's say, the rigid question is there any, let's say, does time spending on study influence students' academic achievement? So we have student academic achievement, or let's say student grade as a continuous, and we have time spending to study is a kind of independent variable. And because we just have one variable as a dependent and one variable as independent, and both are continuous data, then we look through here which one is about continuous, and it's about looking for the relationship or influences. Then we might come, if you want to see the relationship of both, and that usually we must do this before we come to the regression analysis, because we need to see if they have association or relationship or not. Then we might use person product moment correlation. If we just only have one variable for dependent and one variable for independent, and both are continuous, the type of both variables are continuous, the type of the data are continuous, then we might use this kind of statistical test for the analysis. Let's say if we have, let's say, instead we have the categorical on continuous, for example, we have let's say gender, for example, then we might use point-based serial correlation. If let's say we create one specific column for male group and another specific column for female group, and then we analyze that and see the correlation. So we only have one single independent variables and one dependent variable, and then it's actually kind of categorical. Let's say male, the gender, the male is a kind of categorical, and then let's say students' achievement is continuous. Then we might use point-based serial correlation. So this is the way you learn to use appropriate statistical tests based on your research question or hypothesis in your research question. And these are the criteria that you need to consider when you select certain or specific tests of statistical tests or specific method of analysis. In short, please pay attention to your research question and hypothesis. If it's about trying to get general information or give this general description of the data, you just want to know what the information are there without making any inferences, then descriptive statistic should be appropriate for that kind of analysis. But if you want to make inferences, for example, by comparing the means of the group, then you may use different types of statistical tests, such as t-test or ANOVA. And if you want to see, let's say, association or cause effect, then you might use, let's say, for example, Spearman or point material correlations. I think that's all for methods used in analyzing quantitative data. Have a great day.